Now, to get into it, I am going to pass it over to Mary from NRCS, and she is going to introduce herself, and we will start getting into the programmatic part.
Thanks, August. Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Griffith, and I work for NRCS in Ohio. My position is Outreach Coordinator at NRCS, so my job is basically to raise awareness and increase understanding of the programs and services that we offer. So thanks to OEFFA for hosting this webinar. We're hoping to be able to answer the questions that you have about our programs and services today. So please do ask any questions in the chat. We'll be trying to address as many questions that we get at the end of the webinar. So if you do have questions along the way, we are going to be monitoring the chat. If we don't answer them right away, we are going to go back through and answer all of those questions at the end. The other thing is that we're really always here. So we're always here to answer your questions. If you think of something after today and you don't get a chance to ask your question, we want to make sure that you know how to get a hold of us or your local contact at NRCS and know who to call when you do have other questions. So that's basically it for me. We have a really great group of speakers from NRCS on today. And I think you'll find that they have a lot of really helpful information for you. Like I said, please do feel free to ask questions in the chat. We will be watching those. We're not going to ignore those questions. And I'll just go ahead and let Carrie introduce herself to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Mary and August, for setting all of this up. Really appreciate being invited to speak today. My name is Carrie Cusick. I am the Assistant State Conservationist for Programs here in NRCS. So I run the team that runs all of the financial assistance programs for NRCS, which includes the Conservation Stewardship Program, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. Both of those we're going to talk about today. Then also includes the Regional Conservation Partnership Program and the Conservation Innovation Grants Program. So I'm really lucky. We have a really fantastic programs team, and hopefully I can do justice to all of their hard work for you today. And I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
All right. Thank you, Carrie. Like Carrie said, my name is Eric Schwam. I'm the state resource conservationist here in Ohio. My staff and I are responsible for conservation planning and a lot of the technical assistance that is kind of foundational to some of the program work that Carrie and her team does. So we're going to talk about kind of the technical requirements and things that as producers that you should consider and have a better appreciation when adopting these conservation practices. And today, helping me today is Brian Lee, and Brian Lee is on my staff. He wears many hats on the resource staff, but one of the things that we love about Brian is him and his family operate an operation at their home place and have a lot of real hands-on experience with many of these conservation practices that we're going to be talking about today. So Brian.
Okay, hi Eric. Thanks Eric, and hi everybody. As Eric said, I am on his staff, and I have a couple of high tunnels at home. My wife primarily is in charge, does most of the work for vegetables, cut flowers. And we've been doing that for several years. So we have a lot of good pictures and examples of different things today that we'll be talking about. So as Mary said earlier, if you have questions as we're talking, type them in and we'll get to them as we can. And that's all I have, Eric.
Okay, so I think we are probably ready to turn this over to Carrie. Let me get the screen going here.
So the one thing I wasn't sure, okay, that's what I wasn't sure, what the video would look like while you have the screen on. I haven't used Zoom very much, so.
Yeah, and I am trying to get, how about that?
Perfect. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate that. Okay, so Eric's going to be running the slides. I'm going to be talking about the first part, and I'm going to talk about the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. That's what EQIP stands for. And I'm going to be talking about the Conservation Stewardship Program, that is CSP. So I'm going to be starting talking about EQIP. And these are kind of our organic basics when it comes to EQIP. In EQIP, you can be a transitioning to organic operation or a certified organic operation. Both are eligible under the EQIP rules. In EQIP, we have a dedicated organic fund code, but you can also compete in other fund codes. Most of our fund codes are land use based. But the organic fund code specifically has $140,000 payment limitations. So that means under that fund code, you're only eligible for $140,000 aggregate. Under organic, all of our land uses are eligible. So what would be most common for us would be crop, pasture, or farmstead. We have forest as an eligible land use. I'm not sure what that would look like. We've never done one, but if you've got one, get in touch with us and we can talk about what that looks like a little bit. And then your organic status, whether that's transitioning or certified, is self-certification on our application form. And our application form is called an NRCS CPA 1200, and it's number 4D. So if you get a look at an application, you'll be able to see, and it's just a little box that you check. Next slide, please, Eric. So kind of how it works with EQIP is you're going to come in, we're going to talk to each other, you're going to meet with the local conservationists. That's where everything happens for us. I'm not at the local level. I'm the umbrella kind of overseeing everything, but you would talk with the local folks, make sure that you're meeting with them. They'll come out and walk your farm. And you're going to agree to implement practices that are consistent with your organic system plan. You're not required to provide that plan to us, but you do need to provide information for the planning process. That's going to be, depending on what your operation is, it might be related to your animals. It might be related to your manure management, your nutrient management, your crop rotation, whatever that looks like, you're going to be required to provide some information to us. And then when we're working with you in the process of developing your schedule of operations and your conservation plan, we are ensuring that you're addressing those national organic program requirements in terms of whatever conservation practices or activities that you're implementing or planning to implement, and that they all meet the correct OSP standards. So this is not an exhaustive list, and I didn't even put specific practice numbers on this particular slide, but the thing at the top is actually a link to our website. If you Google USDA NRCS Ohio, it's going to bring you to our website for Ohio, and you can pick programs, and then it will take you to a listing of all the programs, and you can look at the practices available. But these are just a sampling of the different types of practices we have. We have practices that involve planting, so that's could be conservation cover, it could be a pollinator planting, or some other kind of wildlife planting. We have practices related to animal feeding operations and waste storage systems. We have practices related to grazing and pasture systems. We have erosion control practices, waterways, structures, things like that. And then we offer a variety of conservation activity plans that we would sit down and you would work with the TSP and us to get those written. Next slide, please, Eric. Okay, so that was EQIP. That's just basics for EQIP. Now I'm going to talk about basics for the Conservation Stewardship Program. So Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP, also has a dedicated pot of money for certified and transitioning producers. This for Ohio, we've had a specific pot of money for 2 years and we've never spent 1 penny of our organic CSP money. It just sits there. We don't get anybody to apply for it. It goes back. The worst thing is, you know, eventually they're going to be like, well, we're just not going to give you any money if you're not going to be able to spend it. So this is something that when I get through this and we kind of talk about the local contact, maybe some of you might be interested in exploring. For CSP, at least 75% of the land offered for enrollment needs to either be certified or transitioning. So if you have 100 acres, that means 75 of your acres fall in that organic or transitioning category. In CSP, you can have some conventionally farmed fields. It just has to be less than 25% of what you're offering. For CSP, unlike EQIP, you have to enroll your entire operation. So if you farm multiple farms, then you would be putting all of those together in your application. One nice thing about CSP, it has a minimum $1,500 annual payment. So you don't have like a little contract like an EQIP. If we do 1/10 of an acre of something to practice, the payment might not be very big. In CSP, it's a minimum $1,500 payment if you meet all of the eligibility requirements. So the annual payment is for the maintenance. It's for what you're doing now and for you to keep doing that particular thing. So it's size neutral. It's based on the number of resource concerns that you meet on each land use. So if you had cropland and farmstead, both, then that you would get two payments added together to meet that annual payment. The second part of that annual payment is the activities, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide, the activities that you do, and those are paid on a per acre basis. And I know you're going to have a ton of questions about CSP. I may or may not be able to get to all of them. I'm just warning you ahead of time because it's pretty confusing to lay it out this way. Payments for the adoption, you get payments for the adoption of new practices, and you get a payment for doing what you're already doing, which is really great. CSP is a 5-year contract, and then you have the option to renew at the end of the 5 years. Next slide, please, Eric. So CSP has 3 options for things that you can do to get payments. We have practices, which is like a specific targeted treatment like a grass waterway or a pollinator planting or something along those lines, conservation tillage, a cover crop, something along those lines. That's a specific thing. It's usually paid on either a per acre or one, like a number 1 or 2 or whatever. The second part of that is an enhancement. So let's say you're already doing cover crops. Well, there's an enhancement in CSP that you can get additional money for doing a certain species mix in your cover crop or for something like that. It's enhancements that are management activities that help kind of pump up the regular practices. And then we have bundles in CSP, which are where you do a whole list of practices together, and then that's bundled up into one big payment, and it addresses a lot of resource concerns at the same time. All right, go ahead, Eric. So CSP activities, there is a ton of them. These are just ones that we find are most commonly used. Conservation cover and field border. So again, those kind of planting type habitats, riparian forest buffers, wildlife habitat, and we have things related to crops, crop rotation, cover crops, the pest management and the residue management, mulching, nutrient management. We can do things like brush management and prescribed grazing. So we kind of cover a broad range of what's there. Next slide, please, Eric. So August asked us to talk about eligibility. So I kind of went through each program. So a little bit about EQIP and a little bit about CSP. And this is like an iceberg, and you're only seeing like the top 1% of the iceberg about the programs. But eligibility is the basic program, basic eligibility is the same for both programs. So I'm going to talk about it the same until I have a couple slides where I show a slight difference. So with all of our programs, you have to be a producer that is eligible both as in 3 ways. And so the basic eligibility is a person, a legal entity, or a joint operation that is engaged in ag production or forest management, or you have an interest in the operation by ownership or rent, you have an interest in the ag product, or you have to be a member of a legal entity that owns the land, rents the land, or has an interest in the ag product. You have to have control of the land that you want to enroll at the time of application. And how we do things here is we give 30 days to address any eligibility issues. So how it works for us is once you would fill out an application, someone will contact you, there'll be a process you'll go through, and then you'll get a letter that says, if anything's missing, you'll get a letter with a 30-day timeline to finish that part of it. Next slide, please, Eric. So there are 3 types of eligibility. There's person eligibility, land eligibility, and program eligibility. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Farm Service Agency. In general, in Ohio, we're mostly co-located. They are kind of our sister under the USDA umbrella, and they handle all of the background record keeping. So all of the things that you would do to establish yourself as a producer that could be eligible for payment would be handled through the Farm Service Agency. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit later. Can you go to the next slide, please, Eric? So next is land eligibility, and land eligibility does vary a little bit by program. So in EQIP, the land must be agricultural or non-industrial private forest. So those are your 2 options there. For CSP, it also must be ag or non-industrial private forest land, where 75% of it meets that certified or transitioning category. And in CSP, your cropland has to have a crop history. So you have to be able to say it had produced a crop from a certain year to a certain year. And that varies based on what farm bill and what policy we're in. Next slide, please. Program eligibility relates back to the specific program. So for the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, the EQIP program, the program eligibility is that you're addressing one natural resource concern with some kind of practice or activity. So if we say erosion is your soil quality is your resource concern, or organic matter maybe, then you could address that with a cover crop. So we identify where the resource concern deficiencies might be, and we help you go through some discussions about what practices could address those. On CSP, I'm not going to explain this to you because it is complex without a lot of forms, but you have to meet what's called the stewardship threshold eligibility requirement, and it relates to the number of resource concerns that you're meeting and how many are priority and how many are not priority. Next slide, please, Eric. So your first steps for any of our programs is you need to establish records. So you would go into your local Farm Service Agency service center and you would establish records with them. And that basically means they're going to help you set up a farm and tract number. One of the things you will need to have is a tax ID, either for you or your entity, whichever you're going to be registering the tract and farm number to. And then you will either need a tax map or a printout of your property boundaries so that they can identify those, so they can put them in their system using GIS. The other thing you need, if you are registering as an entity, either a joint operation or some other kind of entity, you would need signing authority to be established. So who can sign on behalf of the business? Sometimes that's articles of incorporation that somebody specifically designated. something like that. You would need to establish that with the Farm Service Agency so that they and us can use that to know who the appropriate contact and signature authority for your business is. The second step is to contact your local NRCS service center. So you can call or visit your local service center, set up an appointment to talk with the NRCS district conservationist. The local office is the expert, and they will assist you in an application if that's what you want to do. If you just want to come in and talk to them, you're just looking for some technical assistance, maybe you're looking for some resources, something along those lines, they can also help with that. You can come and talk to us even if you do not want to apply for a program. That's what we're there for. We're there to talk to you about your soils, to talk about your operation, and all of those great things. And both of these agencies can be found. So NRCS, if you Google USDA NRCS, you're going to get a website that pulls up, and the first thing you can do is put in the state. You pick the state from a drop down, and then there's a contact us tab on that state, and it lists every service center, every county. It has the address and the phone number for that service center. It is the same for the Farm Service Agency. If you Google USDA Farm Service Agency, you will get a website that lets you pick a state, and then you can view the list of counties to get the contact information. Next slide, please, Eric. So one of the things August asked me to specifically talk about was timing. So one of the things I want to make sure everybody understands is NRCS takes applications anytime. You can walk in the office any day that we are open and fill out an application and sign it and date it and hand it to the district conservationist, and they will accept it. So we take applications all through the whole year. However, we generally have specific batching periods for taking those applications. Our money runs on our fiscal year basis, so October 1 through September 30. So we have to spend our money within that time. So we have different batching periods for different programs, and we announce those batching dates. Usually there's a news release, there's stuff on farmers.gov, there is stuff on the Ohio NRCS website. There, we have a Twitter account, so stuff gets tweeted out all the time that you could follow us there, but all of that gets announced at a minimum 30 days prior to the end of the batching period. Any applications that we take outside after that batching period for that year, we just hold on to, we enter them in the system, and then we get to them for the next batching period. And our timing varies from year to year, and this is specifically for Ohio. So if you're from a different state, your dates may be different. The names of your fund codes might be slightly different, but for the most part, the process is generally the same. So this year, our EQIP Classic batching date was November 14th. So for this year, we've already batched the first set of EQIP applications. But our CSP Classic application batching date, the CSP, we're getting IRA money funding, our EQIP conservation incentive contracts, which is not specifically organic, but organic could apply through it. And our EQIP IRA batching date will be April 7th, 2023. So there is time to get in and talk to people and talk to the local offices to discuss if any of those would be a good fit for you and your operation. And then I wanted to make just to mention a little bit about payments. So payments in EQIP, we have a set amount of money that goes towards historically underserved applicants. So that includes beginning farmers, limited resource farmers, socially disadvantaged farmers, and veteran farmers. These all have definitions. You can go online and type them in. You can ask your local conservationists to pull it up and read through the definitions. They're all self-certification. We only ask for documentation if you get pulled for a spot check. We spot check a couple of these at the beginning of the next year. So that's the only time we ask. Otherwise, it is self-certification. You report and make that determination on whether you meet the definition based on the definition online. Historically underserved applicants are eligible for a larger incentive payment. So instead of a traditional, it's a traditional maybe 75% incentive payment, you might get up to 90% incentive payment. So you do get a little bit more if you fall into that historically underserved application. Those 4 categories also translate to CSP. So you can be a historically underserved applicant in either one of these. The difference is for EQIP, historically underserved applicants are also available, able to utilize our advance payments. So an advance payment is when a portion of a payment is available upfront to help you purchase the materials to start the installation. So if your incentive payment was going to be $1,000, you could potentially, if you fall in this historically underserved, get $500 of that upfront to purchase materials to help you get the practice done. And then upon completion, assuming it meets all of our standards and specifications, you would get the rest of the $1,000, the other $500.
Ma'am?
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are these new rules?
No, sir.
Ma'am, I purchased a greenhouse, what you call a hoop house or a high tunnel in December of 21. Before COVID, the greenhouse was supposed to cost $18,000. The greenhouse ended up costing me $32,000. They gave me $12,000 toward this greenhouse, and I recently received a payment of, I think, an additional $3,400. And now, would that be 90? That's not 90% of the payment. Is that 90% of what's the 90% is my question.
Okay, that's a really great question. Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I appreciate that. And I'm so glad that you got your CARP payment. That's what your second payment was. That's called the Coronavirus Agricultural Relief Payment. And that's something that they did at the national level to help people that were trying to put stuff in during COVID, but were having such a hard time getting materials. The cost was so much higher.
Yes.
So our payment schedule, so our payment schedule pays, when you look at the cost online, and you can go online and look at all the costs. So I'm just going to use made up numbers so I can explain it to you.
Okay.
So we say a practice costs $100 to install.
Okay.
And on our, that includes everything that you would need to install it. If it was dirt moving, if it was materials, all of those things would be in that cost. But what's on our cost list is really 75% of what we say that cost is.
Okay.
So what would show up on the cost list would be $75, right?
Okay. Right,
If you're
right.
historically underserved, you would be eligible for $90. So if you're super savvy, and we said we were going to give you $1,000 for your practice to put in, 100 acres of something. I know that's a big number in our audience, but and you got it for 900, you would still get the $1,000 because you met the amount we needed and you met the standards and specifications. But if your practice cost you $1,100, you're going to get the $1,000, and the extra 100 comes out of your pocket.
Right.
So that's why over COVID, we saw a lot of people, especially livestock people, really were having a lot of money coming out of their pockets. So that's why they did some of the extra payments like you got, which I'm so glad that you brought that up. That's great. To help offset some of that cost. So I say 75 and 90%, but it's that's 75 and 90% of what's listed on our list. It's not not what it actually costs you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'm glad that I was able to explain that. Okay. Okay. I think this is close to my last slide. Just want to talk on payments on CSP for a second. So EQIP, we make that payment. If you do a practice, it passes standards and specs. We certify it, we pay it. It could be any time of the year. CSP gets paid somewhere between October and February for what you did. So right now we're in 23, we're paying for what happened in 22, and you get that annual payment. which is based on your number of resource concerns, how many land uses, all of these good things. That can be a sizable, each land use pays an extra $300 plus the number of resource concerns you're meeting. So that can be a pretty big chunk of money. And then it also pays for the additional payments. So it's like 2 payments squished together in one. You can get some supplemental payments in CSP. And then it has a $200,000 contract limit for individuals and a $400,000 contract limit for general partnerships. The nice thing about CSP is if you are a small but very diverse operation, you can make a lot of money in CSP because it's the diversity that we reward. If you're looking to put in infrastructure, that's probably EQIP is more your style or your speed to start with. A lot of people will do some things in EQIP and then go into CSP and they have figured out they can maximize their payment in that way. And that local conservationist is the person that can help you figure all that out. Eric, can you see if I have any more slides? I can't remember if I put one more on here or not.
No, I think that's it.
Okay,
Carrie.
great. Did I stay within my time? Oh, I was
Yes,
close.
I think we're
Okay.
fine on time. I know that's a lot of information that Carrie provided us, and one of the challenges when we started putting this together, and this is clearly my fault, is we I think tried to think linear and think about the order, but there's no good way to do it because just the nature of working with individuals. But at the same time and oftentimes at the same time that you're working through some of those eligibility things, and Carrie talked about it, before when you submit an application, you're going to work with a conservation planner and develop a conservation plan. So this, now see if I can advance my own slides. This is what I get for wanting control. Conservation planning is what we do at NRCS. It's foundational. It's something that we have done for over 75 years. We're a relatively old agency, and we help producers help the land is our old motto, and something that I connect to very well. And those conservation plans, those schedule of operations that Carrie was talking about, are really fundamental to our financial assistance. And what that conservation plan is it's a system of practices that we have planned to address identified resource concerns and your needs as a producer. And oftentimes when we think about NRCS and people talk about NRCS, we'll think, high tunnels, maybe cover crops, some of our real popular practices. But what I think is important to realize is really it's a system of practices. It's a system of things to make that work for you and to protect those resource concerns. And like Carrie talked about in the first part, if you meet those eligibility requirements, eligible producers on eligible lands may be evaluated and ranked for possible funding. But the great thing is, if you decide that maybe you don't want to participate in the funding, or maybe you decide, hey, I'm not sure if CSP or EQIP is best, we can create the plan, make some estimations of those payments, and then you can decide to proceed or not. So it's a great opportunity. So that conservation planning is fundamental. So I talked about what we do is we design these systems to evaluate or to address resource concerns. And I wanted to take a minute to talk about resource concerns. And what resource concerns are resources like I have listed up here: soil, water, and we drill down even to more detail like soil erosion, soil quality, water quality because of nutrients, air quality that don't meet. So resource concern are those resources that don't really meet an established criteria for sustainability. You might be able to continue to produce crops for a short period of time with a lot of erosion, but long term, we know that you're going to have to invest a lot in irrigation. You might have to invest a lot in fertilizer and other things to grow a crop. So we know it's not sustainable. So we plan practices to address resource concerns. There's a lot of practices we plan, and today Brian and I are going to talk about a few of those kind of practices that we get a lot of attention about. We're going to talk about 2 new ones that we're trying out this year in Ohio. Here's a list of practices, and again, this is kind of the list of practices that we plan routinely on crop ground. You know, those crop rotations, residue management, you know, the tillage, nutrient management, pest management. Know that you know, for livestock operations, we have a whole nother suite of practices. For forested land, we have a whole nother suite of practices. So we will plan these practices and work with you to make to make decisions that not only protect those resource concerns. If you're a certified organic producer, if you're transitioning to certification, you know, that support that organic system plan. A lot of the practices we offer and we have for the organic producer tie directly. The names might not be exactly the same as how it's laid out in your organic system plan, but just for an example, you know, a lot of the buffers, we might call them filter strips or field borders or conservation covers, but they're things that can not only protect some of those resource concerns, but maybe give you that buffer if you have a conventional neighbor. So they all tie together. So we're going to talk about, like I said, just a handful of practices today, Brian and I, just to kind of give you a feel of kind of, you know, we talk about, and Carrie talked about things meeting our standards and specs. That's what we're going to talk about, is how when we classify practices. And the first one we're going to talk about is the high tunnel system. And each practice has a definition in different sections that I'm going to go through. So the definition is an enclosed polyethylene or polycarbonate plastic fabric covered structure that it's used to cover and protect crops from the sun and the wind and excess rain and cold. Oftentimes here in Ohio, we use them to extend the growing season, you know, so you can meet maybe needs for your market in terms of vegetables, whether that's early in the spring or late in the fall, early winter. And this practice is planned to address that plant health and productivity resource concerns. So it falls within that plant. And we plan this practice on land that's capable of producing crops where the extension of that growing season or because of the sun, the wind, they're damaging crops, and we need to extend the growing season. It does only apply to crops kind of grown in the natural soil profile. So it's not really for tabletop benches, portable pots, or hydroponics. Additional criteria is, you know, some of the high key points of the requirements is we're going to require that you buy one of these pre-manufactured kits. The high tunnel frame can be constructed of some different material, metal, wood, and it must be at least 6 feet high at the peak of the structure. We require that we create end walls, like you can see in this picture here, to give you that environmental control. So when the cooler temperatures, you can close it up. We also have some requirements because we want it to last long for you, or you know, sufficient. We want you to buy something that's going to be around for a while and serve your needs. So there's a requirement in terms of the lifespan of the plastic, and it must be that 6 mil greenhouse grade UV resistant material so it doesn't break down. Additionally, like I said, the crops must be grown in the natural soil profile. We do allow raised beds for situations where maybe the existing soil condition can be improved, fertility, kind of drainage issues. The practice cannot be used for sheltering and housing livestock or storage equipment. It's not a barn. It's a part of your cropping system and part of your cropland. Obviously, we're going to want to locate it near water source for irrigation, because when you construct a high tunnel, you're going to need to supply irrigation in a lot more, because you're going to exclude the rainfall. And we're going to want to construct it on near level sites, not to exceed 5% slope. So I have a few pictures here, and this is the point at which I give you all the boring vegetable stuff, and Brian gets to talk to you about some of his experiences here that he's had in central Ohio with some of his high tunnels. So Brian.
Okay. Well, that sounds good, Eric. I'll be talking a little bit differently, I guess a little more technical, and speaking from experience and from things that I've seen from visiting a lot of different operations. These high tunnels here are actually from on my property. I have the Quonset style high tunnel, which is the rounded style. And most of you are probably familiar with the different styles, Quonset versus Gothic. In this areas of the state where we get more snow, the Quonset the Gothic definitely does offer some more support. I live in central Ohio, an hour north of Columbus, and I'm out of the Lake Erie effect, but we do get snows, maybe the most we've had 10 inches or a foot. And my wife is home, so if she needs to clear the snow, she can. But if you're not going to be around your tunnel, if you're away from your property and snow load could be an issue, then you would really want to consider Gothic over the Quonset style. As a small operator, it was easier for me to construct these tunnels. These are about 20 feet wide, 60 feet long. And I did 90% of the work myself. So I liked it for that aspect. I could manage it and it was cost effective. But again, I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, in the Gothic cost a little more. There's some additional cost with the
yes,
but it will hold up to weather a little better.
You're right. And if you want to grow tomatoes and use the purlins, which are the horizontal bars at the top, if you want to use the purlins for supporting your tomatoes, then you probably would want to go with Gothic. We do grow tomatoes in these for sure, two rows in each one, but I do think you can get more support out of the Gothic. And then the plastic life, you can see the rip up there on the left picture. That plastic was just replaced a couple of months ago. 3 months ago, I think in October. We had a little bit of warm weather, and 3 or 4 of us were able to put that on in about an hour and a half. And that piece of plastic lasted 10 years. So probably a little bit longer than you might want to keep them, but the plastic will degrade over time. But you can definitely get several years out of them and maintain them.
And when you talk about that plastic degrading, that's kind of that yellow haziness look to it.
Yes,
and it blocks a little bit of the sun, and eventually it might start hurting plant growth.
Right. And then from rolling the sides up too, you can get a little bit of mildew and other crud buildup that will, right.
Yeah, I don't know. Can you guys see my mouse or not? So you're talking this area?
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Is there an agent to clean that?
I believe you probably could find a way to clean. I don't know if you're organic. I don't know if the cleaning agent that they sell for cleaning mildew off of vinyl siding would, that would be something, because we're not certified organic, but that's something you would want to make sure whatever you used. I mean, soap and water might do it,
Okay.
and a brush. So.
But you got, your family's pretty busy as far as getting out there and brushing.
Yeah, right. And it's, I mean, I don't know if how much sun it keeps from coming in. I'm not sure. But
so briefly, Brian, can you tell us what kind of crops maybe you've had some pretty good success with?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of greens in the high tunnels. We do greens and tomatoes. But since we do tomatoes, my wife keeps tomatoes going into November, and it's too late to get and it's usually too late to get another crop or even a cover crop planted at that time. But sometimes we will take 1 or 2 rows. The middle picture, there's lettuce on one side, and then the middle row is a cover crop. So we did that 2 or 3 years ago. We were able to remove the tomatoes early, and so you do have a sacrifice if you do that. But it did vastly improve the soil just by having this cover crop, and we do often. If we can get them seeded in September or October, we do often have greens going through the winter, more for personal use at this point. But if you get them established early, you can definitely, without heat, you can definitely keep greens, maybe some other crops going as well. I think these are some sort of flowers on the bottom right. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
My wife is switching over to cut flowers. So we are doing a lot of cut flowers now.
And that is another opportunity that you have, in terms of, looking at different crop rotations. Well, Brian, I think we're going to move on because we got to get through. We want to leave plenty of time for questions. I know we're getting a few questions in the chat too, and we want to get time for that. So this year, we have the opportunity to adopt a new standard. It's an interim standard. It's kind of like on a trial basis nationally. It's called raised beds, and obviously, it's for creating an above ground growing environment. And this practice, like a high tunnel, not only will help plant growth and productivity, some of the concerns around salts and other contaminations that might be limiting use and reduce some particulate matter emissions in terms of an air quality benefit. We're going to apply this practice in land that's in where the natural soil condition is inhibited because of just not enough soil, not suitable. It's unfavorable for production. Thinking about maybe some of the urban settings, oftentimes there's very little soil, maybe 6 or 8 inches of soil, and then maybe a lot of debris and concrete that may limit that plant growth. One of the things in terms of the raised beds, they have to be between 6 and 24 inches above that natural soil layer. And one of the things that we should consider, and I put this table up here, and that different crops have different rooting depths, and really you probably want to evaluate how much soil you have naturally to determine how much of a raised bed you need. It's kind of a catch-22. You have a lot of control. You can add compost and make a really nice condition, but the higher you make that bed, the more water, the more evaporation is going to require. I think we've all had experiences, and I've done this living in different houses where I didn't have a lot of room for my personal use, trying to grow a tomato in a 5-gallon bucket. At some point, you can't water it when you're watering it 3 times a day and you still have blossom end rot. it's evaporating and you don't have enough there. And that's the one of the challenges, I think, with raised beds. You know, we want to keep them, you know, to give that soil volume for the plant growth, but, you know, not to exceed to require that great water need. Beds can be framed or unframed. I see us using a lot of frame beds just because of the equipment and the size of equipment to create and to make a unframed bed kind of annually is going to be prohibited in a lot of cases. Frame beds can be constructed using untreated rot resistant lumber such as cedar, white oak, locust, things like tires, chemically treated lumber, you know, the pressure treated lumber, the landscape timbers, railroad ties, pallets even, are not going to be suitable for this practice just because of some of those chemicals and some of those things that you don't want to expose to the soil, to the plants. This is a good opportunity for me to talk about organic certification. You know, we do have some understanding of organic certification, but we are not the experts when we plan practices like this. If you were a certified organic producer, we would be sure to make sure you as a producer understood, you know, take your plans to your certifier and make sure everything's okay. Make sure there's no adjustments that need to be made because we want to keep you in line with your certification. Oftentimes, you know, additional growing material will be needed, you know, additional soil. We want to make sure and require that growing material is free of debris and contaminants. The compost is clean and because we really want to make that media good for plant growth. We're going to design, you know, travel lanes so you can get around foot traffic or, you know, other pieces of equipment you might need to get through your area. So here's a couple pictures of raised beds. I love showing this, Brian. Me and Brian has actually given this presentation a couple of times now, and I want the middle one. I want those fancy raised beds, but I don't think I can afford them. They look so pretty.
Well, and Eric, as you pointed out, these are tall ones.
Yes,
those might be good for access, but and if you have a good water source. But that's the thing with the raised beds and high tunnels, you have to have a good water source. And I don't know how much of the water practices we go over, but for the raised beds, the picture on the left, I mean, that's typical what I think most people, if you get a 2x6 and again,
high tunnel.
Yeah, and again, as Eric mentioned, you know, definitely check with your organic certifier to make sure the materials you're using are allowed.
And for this practice, you know, if we look at this picture here on the left, on the bottom, this corrugated steel, you know, obviously I think this is probably some sort of kit, you know, kind of like the high tunnels if you wanted to go that route. But if you also wanted to, you know, go to a local lumber supplier and buy untreated, you know, good lumber and do it yourself or pay somebody to do it, that's okay too. It has to meet the requirements, the height requirements, and it can't be those things that we listed. I don't know that maybe somebody would want to try to think about that, but once you think about putting some of that near your soil, I think you would think twice maybe. So in obviously, I think I said, you know, raised beds were allowed in the high tunnels. Obviously we got this picture of this one here. So that would be an option. I know, Brian, you said you've had some experience through the years with some small raised beds.
Yes, we've done similar ones, look identical to the ones on the upper left. We did those outdoors because I have wet soils. So moisture is a problem for us. And now we have removed the actual raised beds and just have mounded growing beds. But something that Eric mentioned earlier, or a question came up about high tunnels from kits, and the high tunnels do have to be purchased as kits, but whereas raised beds do not. I mean, I see people selling raised bed kits online quite often. And you will spend a lot of money if you do that. But if you have access to materials and are handy and can, can come up with some good ideas, and you already have a lot of materials, then, if they meet your requirements, then I would, definitely try to work with what you have. It's definitely the affordable route, but you may have to purchase them too. So,
Right.
Definitely lots of options out
Yeah,
there.
there's a little more options, and like I said, this practice is what we call an interim practice, and we're evaluating it nationally. There's actually a little bit of a survey, which is a good thing because you can help us, influence us for the future, and tell us things that, hey, this worked well, this didn't. It's really a valuable process that we do to evaluate new conservation practices. And speaking of that, the other one we're going to talk about today is the low tunnel system. It, like the raised bed, is a brand new interim practice this year for us. In the definition is very similar to the high tunnel system. It's all really maybe somewhat of a size and how long you would use it. It's that enclosed plastic or fabric covered structure that is used to protect crops, again, from those wind, sun, rainfall, or here in Ohio, the cold, and extend the growing season to reduce, and we also could use it to reduce pest pressure. Again, thinking about the plant productivity and health and plant pest pressure, I always have trouble saying that together, is the practices, or is the purposes that we plan these practices. This practice is applicable to on land where crops can be grown, and where sun and wind and pest and other things that damage the crops and would benefit from this, these types of I don't know if I want to call them structures, but these types of practices. If you want a height that's greater than 4 foot, we're going to encourage you. We're going to say, well, that's no longer a low tunnel. We're going to point you more to the high tunnel thing, which has to be 6 feet, is the minimum height. So if we think about the criteria, these tunnels can be used over prior to planting. You can put them over already established or transplanted crops. We do them over beds or containers. They may float, or more often, I think, we're going to have some kind of support structure, hoops of some sort. So when we think about the support system, we have some criteria. They can be metal wire, that 9 to 10 gauge wire, electrical conduit, durable plastic. We've got some examples, that PVC piping type thing, as long as we're less than 4 feet at the peak. If we're going to use that plastic cover and kind of protect it from the cool, we require that you use that 4 mil greenhouse grade material again, so it lasts. We can also do shade cloth to extend the growing season. Maybe you have some of those lettuces, some of those cool crops that you want to extend further into the summer and kind of keep them from bolting and get some more production out of them later in the year. We can use shade cloth, and shade cloth comes in 10 to 60% shades, and you want to select depending on the crops grown and your objectives and needs. Brian, I know you've said in the past you guys have used some shade cloth. We saw some on your high tunnel. What I meant to ask you, what kind of shade do you know off the top of your head that provides? You always get the same, or?
Oh, sorry. I had the catalog out. I should have looked at the catalog earlier. It's not the highest one. It might be, I honestly don't know if it's 65%. It's black. I know a lot of people are beginning to use, I think, the white colored ones now, white or red, but ours is fairly medium to upper.
Medium, yeah.
Yeah.
In the catalogs, and you can call some of the retailers, and they have, right, I'm sure, good thoughts and advice. We need to think about the anchoring because we don't want this thing to blow away. in Ohio, it seems like it's windy a lot. Low tunnels are appropriate inside your high tunnel, and I think we got a picture, and we'll talk about why you might want to do that. And again, you'll want to locate this somewhere where you've got a source of water, because depending on how you use it, you may need to add irrigation if you're not letting that natural rainfall get into it. Like a high tunnel, you'll have to think about snow accumulation. If it's, if it snows on it, it can damage the plants. So the low tunnel system practice is more like the raised beds, and that there's a lot of flexibility, Brian, and you can buy kits. We've got some pictures of some pretty nice kits that probably would cost more. I think that probably would be really nice. And then other things where, that are less kits. So let's talk about a few of these, Brian. And
Okay, I know the two on the bottom left, left and center, those are probably made with a 9 or 10 gauge wire hoops that you can purchase, I think, for 50 or 60 cents a piece, and then you can use the fabric. And so, and when August did his poll earlier, it looks like there are a lot of you all on today have experience growing. So a lot of you are probably familiar, maybe have some of these in operation right now. But the main purpose for using the low tunnels inside the high tunnels, this time of the year, you can keep things like lettuces and spinach and other greens viable. And you're basically using your high tunnel like a refrigerator. And we did have that cold spell here before Christmas, and at that time we did have low tunnels outside just because it was such a mild fall and early winter that we were able to keep greens outside right up until that cold spell where the wind chill was -40 here. And inside the tunnel, though, we had 2 layers of the medium weight row cover, and that did protect the greens and things that were in there, a few things that my wife has. So so it definitely can extend the crop further, and these low tunnels are really a low cost alternative to even using high tunnels. Some people have used them instead of high tunnels outside, but once you have the high tunnel, then you can just keep pushing things a little bit further by using the low tunnels. And well, I don't know that they're low tunnels, but I've seen people cover the entire area of a high tunnel. They'll rig up some type of system with cable supports running the length of the high tunnel. And then they'll have a piece of fabric, essentially the width of the high tunnel, covering it all. So
it just adds some more protection. So if it gets,
exactly
even colder, it will live.
Right. And I think we are allowing the PVC pipes to be used as well. So again, those are things that you can construct, you can purchase, you can acquire those on your own. So, and I'll mention real quick, the picture on the bottom right, that is insect netting. That's not a low tunnel, but it was a homemade structure with insect netting that had cucumbers growing inside there, self-pollinating cucumbers to keep the insects out, the cucumber beetle out. So, and I have seen that fabric used on a high tunnel to keep, well, people are planning for the, what's that fly that's coming from Pennsylvania? I think it's in eastern Ohio now.
A spotted lanternfly.
Yes,
there you
thank you,
go.
Mary. We saw lots of those in Pennsylvania this summer, but yeah, so folks are using those for the raspberries. Again, and the cost, it might not be too much more than plastic. I think it is a little bit more, the insect netting, but it's definitely something to consider.
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh no, it falls under low system, so low tunnel system. So it could be cost shared.
Yeah, and I forgot to, and that's what I started to say. I forgot to make it clear. Was kind of rushing through. When we come to low tunnels, you can use either plastic, extending you know, that low tunnel for the cool temperatures, you know, either in the early spring, late fall. We can use the blankets, you know, the more fabric blankets. I forget what there's different terms for it, Brian, but that are more temporary for short weather events. Shade cloth, extending it into the summer, maybe provide that shade, cool it down, and the insect netting. When we think about using the insect netting, it has to be over you know, part of an overarching kind of pest management plan. Again, great opportunity maybe for an organic producers that are looking for, you know, alternatives to maybe pesticides, but it needs to be part of a pest management plans where you consider, you know, what your target pest is and the timing. You know, timing is going to be key, that you want to make sure it's up in time to prevent the pests from getting to your plant. So a lot of opportunities there. We just covered those 3 practices. We do have a lot of other practices in terms of irrigation. We could probably go on all day. I know we have before, right, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's a lot of opportunities, and we didn't even touch on livestock type opportunities. So I know we're running short of time. I'm sorry, Austin. We probably took too much time, but we do have this link that Carrie was talking about, the Find the Service, the local service center link. That will provide those addresses and phone numbers for not only the NRCS office, but the FSA office. It's a great place to start. So with that, I don't know if there's any questions. I'm going to leave this, if you don't mind, I'll leave the screen up, and then if anybody wants to, you know, write it down, take a picture of it, that would be great.
Yeah, I will let people keep asking questions in the chat, but since we have a few minutes, if people want to come off of mute and ask their questions, that's also welcome. And I'll go ahead and look in the chat and see if anyone's questions are unanswered.
I will just jump in for a second and say that I put in a link to this slide that doesn't work anymore. That Find a Service Center won't take you anywhere. So I have the correct link over here in the chat. I'm sorry. So just want to make sure you all have that link. We do encourage you to work through a lot of questions you might have with your local office, because you know, we have all this information out here, but there's a lot of nuance to it. So with every time that we encourage you to work with your local office. They can really help you through a lot of the questions you'd have in the process.
Eric, I see someone asked in the chat, I don't know if this one was answered, about what is the reimbursement rate on low tunnels?
Yes. Harry, in light of our email today, we got an email today. I think they're taking some of that back maybe, but I can give you kind of a ballpark. There's a lot of, like Carrie was saying, the rate is different, you know, if you're historically underserved. So the low tunnel is kind of the ballpark. The first year, which will help you offset some of the cost of the material, is somewhere between $1, $2 a square foot. And then in future years for the management part, it's around 25 cents a square foot, if that makes sense. So it's kind of hard to, you know, so $1.50 plus another 25 a square foot. So you kind of have to do, think about how big your area. We do have, with interim practices, we limit the size. You know, we're not going to be able to, you know, do low tunnels on an acre. So there is a size limitation on that too. But as Brian would probably tell us, that, you know, they're a lot of work. You don't want too many. You'll spend your day managing your low tunnels and maybe not harvesting or selling.
a couple of questions that were put in the chat that I think would be important to reiterate. One, there is no fee to visit or apply to any NRCS programs. I saw someone asked about that. And let's see. The other thing is, though there is specific funds for organic and transitioning to organic producers within these programs, you do not, there are funds available even if you are not transitioning to organic. It's kind of inevitable that you'd be doing some type of sustainable agriculture, but not necessary that you'd be working towards certification.
That is correct. And sorry, I had to go off video there. I think I was having some internet conductivity issues. Maybe that will help. But yes, please, there's no cost to have a conversation with us. You know, we can walk you through the process and you know, give you as much information. The local field office will be able to calculate those payment rates exactly. So you know, like our earlier question, you know, especially in the changing times right now where it seems like things are really changing fast, you know, before you sign that contract, you'll know exactly, hey, the low tunnel, you know, the rates are this is what I'll get, you know, this X amount. And then you can make a really informed decision at that time of signing that contract. So,
Eric, another question from the chat. Can you clarify if there's funding available for raised beds?
there is, it's maybe a little bit nuanced than that. And Carrie, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit. It has to do with, since it is interim conservation practices, we sometimes limit the fund pools that we offer them in. And Carrie, do you want to talk about that just a little bit?
So there, as far as we know right now, there's funding available. Here in Ohio, the fund pools that have that available are the organic fund pool, our urban conservation initiative fund pools, our high tunnel fund pool, and I think those in the historically underserved fund pools, which we have 3 of those. So that's where it's available right now. It's not available in our general cropland fund pool. Because it's interim, we wanted to introduce it a little bit at a time, and we like to see how things work before we kind of open up the floodgates, so to speak.
And that is a good point too, that, you know, since there's some people from other states, this is something that we in Ohio and in a number of states have chose to offer these interim standards. But it's not universal across the country. I know it's a priority of our state conservationists to really try to stay on the cutting edge, or sometimes I feel like stay up with producers that, you know, in some of these circumstances. So we're excited to see what kind of good stuff people can do with these.
And to answer this last question I see in here about who do we contact about the funding, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you've got questions, really would recommend you reach out to your local service center. They put the link to it in the chat, but also if you want some help finding your local service center, or someone to put you in contact, I'm happy to help you navigate that process as well. I'll make sure to put my email in the chat. But I think you've been getting emails from me in general, but OEFFA works with NRCS. So like we said, so they don't necessarily do the certification, but OEFFA does the certification. So it's not mutually exclusive, and we'd be happy to help. Now, are there any other questions before we close out? Not that this is your only chance, but I just want to make sure.
I have a question. Hi, by the way, I'm Dorothy. I work with Nifty Hoops, and I talk with growers quite often about this program in different states. And one of the questions I get very often is if there is a list, a master list of conservation practices that people can look through to kind of get an understanding of what they may be eligible for and what they may already be doing.
Yeah, that is a good point that I should have pointed out. All of our what we call practice standards and basically the criteria, the things I talked about with those 3 practices are posted to what we call the field office technical guide. Sometimes we try to put initials to everything, but it's the FOTG is what we call it. And it's a little bit, it takes a little bit to navigate, but it's got 5 sections, and section 4 of that field office technical guide, there's the conservation practice standard. So we in Ohio have nearly, I think it's almost 200 now. But it's the gamut of things from cropland, irrigation, forestry setting type stuff, pasture and grazing stuff, wildlife. So that is a really good place to start. In every state in the country has that field office technical guide. When you get there, you navigate to your state, and then you'll navigate down to that section 4 where it says conservation practice standards.
Great, thank you. That was very helpful.
All right, well, with that, thank you everyone for joining us today. It was a really good turnout. Sounds like people got a lot out of it. I really hope you got some of your questions answered. And if not, again, they're really receptive to your outreach. So give them a call. You can, like I said, you can schedule a visit. And as I mentioned, you're always welcome to reach out to me if you want some help navigating these programs. So thank you, Ohio NRCS, for being here. And thank you all for doing what you do. And I will.
Well, thank you for inviting us, and thank you for helping the producers of Ohio, do really important work. So we do appreciate. I feel like we're all on the team conservation working together.
For sure. Thank you all again, and have a good rest of your day.